that's a cue for me. I was like, great, let's go. So Nikki and anyone else who's watching this is Rachael. So Rachael Ooi, she's the principal financial advisor at Your Wealth Consultants. And they are one of our wonderful sponsors at Social Moms Club Winner Manly. And I've been working with Rachael since the start of the year, and I just think she is awesome. And she's just so fun and down to earth, and I'm really excited to be able to share all of your knowledge, but also enthusiasm for your role and your passions with the Social Mums Club community. And then tonight, obviously, about raising financially responsible kids, which is very important. So take it away, Rachael.
Excellent. Well, welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. It is very exciting to present on this. This is something that is like my little pet project. I really love working in this space, particularly being a mum. It is one of those things that for me, is really, really important. And I feel that we all sort of, fear having discussions with our kids, but hopefully this might make it a little bit easier for you, so that and give you some ideas just on how to ensure that you are raising financially responsible kids. So just to get started, I have to do this in front of everything. It's our general advice disclaimer. Everything that I say in here should be taken in light of your personal circumstances. I haven't obviously taken into account everyone's personal circumstances, but feel free to contact me and we can have further discussions if there's anything there that you feel might be pertinent to your world. Okay. So look, I'm really grateful that I've got to that you're letting me into your homes tonight while to have this important discussion. So I thought it was really important that I introduce you to my family. So here I am. I'm a financial advisor. I work largely with small to medium-sized businesses, working to make their finances work in conjunction with their life. So we always say exciting life, boring money, and not the other way around. We want to keep things and mitigate as much risk as possible and be able to, get to the point where we are able to, provide them with the lifestyle that they want to live. So these are my two beautiful girls. So on the left there is Luca. Luca is 17. She's going through some interesting life stages at the moment in regards to things like cars. We're having to talk about insurance. We're having to talk about cost, and making sure that everything sort of comes together in a way that, that she's going to be able to go out there and she's going to be able to maintain that vehicle. So that is Luca. She's currently saving. She wants to go to Europe when she leaves school, after she's finished school. So she's got a year and a half where she's got some big savings goals herself. The other daughter is Regan. Regan lives in Regan Land. We love Regan Land. It is very, very quite a beautiful place to live, I imagine. It's quite airy-fairy there. But Regan is a very different type of character to Luca. She is quite confident, and not that Luca's not confident, but Luca's quietly confident. So they're quite different, and I think it's important to note that, because when they're different, you deal with them differently. And I'm sure that each and everyone's kids are different in the way that you'll work with them and manage them. So I will tell some stories about my girls throughout tonight that will provide you with some insight into how, I've worked with the two different personalities over the years to try and get them into a world where they're, financially responsible. Okay, and then I have Bondi and I have Pirate. So these are my, what I call up pop-up expenses. So I think we all, have pets and they're so important, but they tend to not cost huge lots of money in everyday life. However, when something happens, they can be incredibly expensive. So my fur babies, I've got one lying beside me right now, and he's a gorgeous little monster. But yes, they also become a consideration when you're, talking about money in everyday sense. So I'm a single mum. I have been on my own since Regan was about 3 months old. And I can tell you, we've had times in our lives where we've actually had lots of money. And, 10, 12 years ago, we had no money. I've had times where I've been had to be very savvy to get through. And times where, I've worked really hard and we've been able to do all the things we wanted to do. So I just wanted to give that bit of clarification that it hasn't always been easy, and that my girls have gone through that process with me. And I think that's what makes a good way to teach your kids, is when you do actually give them some real world examples along the way. So why is it so important? Well, did you know that kids actually, they start developing their money habits between the ages of 2 and 7? So basically, from when kids start to be able to count, they are all of a sudden being able to have these concepts of money that come into their world. So what I mean by that is, if I give you one lolly and you give me 2 lollies back, those types of trade situations. I mean, I love Easter's a perfect example of this. I love in Easter, having kids, they go out and they're running around and they do their Easter egg hunt, and they've got all their Easter eggs, and all of a sudden they're trading with their friend or they're trading with their sister. Which one? Well, I'll swap you this one for that one. That is a form of money management and bartering that does form some of those early habits for kids. The other important one that I think, that we can sort of look at from those early ages, the difference between want and need. This is a really super interesting one. What you want versus what you actually need is very interesting. And asking the kids, well, why do you need that? And you can watch their little brains ticking away going, well, why do I need that? Is it a need or is it a want? And it becomes a very interesting discussion across the board. So unfortunately for us, kids don't, they're not born with these skills. This is something that is learnt. They watch mum and dad go to the supermarket. They watch mum and dad in everyday life, and you're the role models who will provide them with these ongoing ability to, master these skills. So, and it is interesting and it is hard, because our grandparents would have been the lay-by generation, or the save for it generation probably. Our parents would have been that lay-by generation. But unfortunately now our kids are in a stage where they're almost the afterpay generation. And so there's a whole heap of different skills that I think, are missing in our society, that are important that we kind of give to our children. So good money skills give kids confidence. We want our kids to have a really good, solid, confident relationship with money. We want to make sure that our kids are not in any way having bad relationships with money. Money is not a bad thing. It is important lesson, and unfortunately we don't have enough time that's spent on that in schools. So as parents, we need to make sure that kids understand these money management skills. This will help them avoid costly mistakes later in life, which I think is a really important one. These foundational skills will help them over the long term. It also encourages them to make smart decisions, but it also encourages them to think about the decisions before they make them, which is what we want them to do. We want them to have that responsibility and that excitement about money as well. So it's setting the foundation for things like investments and, all of those big purchases that they're going to make in real life, for example, buying a house, buying a car, they might be taking out a loan for the house. We want them to understand and feel confident making those choices in the future. And that all begins with those foundational steps right now. So why does it matter? At school, kids generally can find the, X in an equation, but they wouldn't know and understand about tax. They don't have those basic literacy skills that financial literacy skills that we had more of at school. So things like budgeting and things like that, like it's not necessarily taught in a practical sense. So, quite often they're learning things which are really complex, and those things, whilst they use the principles that we need, they're not necessarily teaching them everything for their actual basic literacy, financial literacy. So at home, it's really important to have these skills to discuss because it's not really done as a school subject. And I think it's really important that we fill that gap as parents. So we're in this crazy digital world where quite often kids don't actually see folding cash. And this is a really, probably my first big point is that kids see the tap, 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 tap. Sometimes it's with your phone. Sometimes it's with, your card. Yeah, exactly. Right. It is not it's not a visual thing. And I am a big believer in cash. I always used cash as examples with my kids, physical touch cash. And the main reason for that is that they can grasp that concept. You give money over, you get a product back. And I think, going cashless, we sort of forget to tell kids, well, you know what, when I do tap that card or I tap that phone, that actually what happens is money gets taken out of my bank account. That key point, that flow of how the money works, is not something that is being regularly used for kids to understand. So then it comes down to things like we're looking at at money that for them just doesn't exist. They double click their phone and they see mum and dad do it, and all of a sudden they've bought something. It is a very different world, and it's a hard world for us as parents to be able to provide good demonstrations and good role modeling for our kids, because purely it's not really a place that we can show them when in our everyday lives, it's not really how it works. So my big point is to break this discussion, break the money taboo. It was sort of a word, I grew up in an Asian family, and an Asian family, they talk about money over the table. They talk about money in the most ridiculous times. However, I do know that is not the norm. That is not the norm. People don't talk about money very often with their kids, and they don't talk about value, and they don't talk about the understanding of how that fits into the everyday life. So what I mean by this is having conversations regularly about money. So, okay, so you need this. Excellent. So what do we need to do? How do we get that? Okay, so we've got to go to the shop. We have to buy that. Those games that kids play with, their play money, and they go to the grocery store, they put their groceries in their little basket and they put their money over, and then the person gives them back their change. Those games are really important, and it is important to have those discussions with kids because, like I always think about it, I'm not sure if you've seen them online, but there's those things with people who, make what a sign that someone would do versus a sign with a kid today. So what I mean by that is, like, if we say take a photo, my generation goes like this, my daughter's generation goes like this. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So it's a very different thing. And it's the same with money. In my generation, I would have gone, this is how I pay for something. My girls go, this is how I pay for something. It's a very different mindset. So I'm all for bringing back cash in certain circumstances, particularly with kids. I always used to give my kids their pocket money in cash. So I'd give them, let's say I'd give them two $5 notes. I would go with them to the bank and they'd put one $5 note into the bank account. And it seems like such a frivolous task because it's really, it's $5, no big deal. But the thing is it's the habits that they're building. So for my girls, it was very exciting. Like Luca used to get really excited because she was the saver out of the two of mine. And so she'd go, look at my bank balance. My bank balance is more than yours, because she would put half of everything. So if she got money for her birthday, she'd put half into her bank. Whereas, and I never made the girls do that. That was just something that I encouraged of them. And they did it, and they were quite happy to, because when you think about it in life, we might earn, let's say you earn $500, you put half of that away most of the time towards bills, mortgage, life,
Probably
so
more than half.
more than, well, it is actually, it's 2/3 is the actual statistical number. So, it is not as clear, these days. So I always think building those little habits, and I only did that till the girls were in grade 5 or 6, but it used to be a thing. We used to go to the bank. It was part of our process. We went together. It was, they wrote on their little Dolomite books to put the money in the bank. And it was that habit that we were building with them. And then the other money went into their purse or their wallet. And that's the other thing. You've got to keep that safe. That is really important. When you have money, you've got to put it somewhere safe, and it needs to be kept safely, and it needs to be respected. I always remember Regan lost her wallet, and that was devastating for her. She would have been about 10 at the time, and I think she had about $30 or $40 in there, which in her eyes was 8 weeks worth of saving. Right. So that was a lot of saving for her. That was almost a whole term worth of saving. And she lost it. And it was devastating to her. But it all of a sudden taught a big lesson that money is very precious and very important. And I suppose we need to also, teach our kids about having that respect for money. Put your money in your wallet, keep your wallet safe, And it was the age-old thing my dad used to say to us, Rach, you always fold your money nicely, put your money, respect your money, put it into whatever you do. Don't scrunch it up and put it into the bottom of your bag. Put it in, so give it the respect it deserves. And I 100% agree with that. So what we used to do with my girls is learning some real life money habits, I suppose. First and foremost, I always used to have the discussion with them about the cost of things. And I think this is a really important one. I used to actually say, you have to find tangible things with kids to be able to get them to understand something. So what I used to say was, okay, so one day that I go to work a week is the cost of the groceries that go into the fridge so that we can have toilet paper, so that we can eat. You can have your favorite, muesli bar or whatever it be in your lunchbox. One day that I go to work pays for that. That was a really interesting concept for the girls to understand, because they get time, right? They don't necessarily get the value of money here and there. And it's really, I must admit, that's a hard lesson to have to learn. And it's interesting, like I always sort of look at my, if you've got a big thing and it costs you this much money, $5 it's going to cost you for something big. But then why is something little going to cost you $10? It's, I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
Something little costing you $10. So it's value, it's not necessarily just because something's big that it's going to cost more, or and vice versa. And I was actually having a really good conversation with a colleague of mine today, Kurt, and he's got young boys. And he said he took them into Kmart the other week, and he said, okay, boys, they wanted a car, so you can get a car. So the Hot Wheels cars that are about this big, they're whatever price, they were more expensive than a big car that was a no brand name car. And he said it was this really interesting discussion because his 3-year-old's kind of going, well, I should be able to get two because it's the same size. And it's a really interesting thought because, it was actually double the price of what the other one was. And so it was this really interesting life lesson because kids seem to think that money grows on trees and that this is just this, it just happens. Mum and dad just have money. And, it's not always the way. So we used to play this awesome game, and I would encourage everyone to give it a go. We used to go to the grocery store and I'd wager a Mars bar or a Snickers bar or whatever it was. We always use chocolate because chocolate's a great currency in my house. And we'd put that in the trolley and we would go through and do our shopping, whether it be a big shop or a little shop. And the girls would calculate in their own head how much it was going to cost. So the game was, the winner was the person who could get the closest without going over. It was so interesting. We played this game for years. And in fact, I went to the shop with my eldest the other day, Luca, and we were only getting a couple of little things. And she goes, I'll wager you a Mars bar, Mum. And she put that on that in the basket. And so, yeah, we were still playing it. It was a bit of fun. It was a bit of a laugh. And it always got to the point where you get to the checkout and the girl would be like, laughing because the three of us would be going, okay, who's closest? Oh, I'm gonna win, and it was a little bit of friendly competition in that respect, that just gave them the understanding of what things actually cost. The big one always was interesting when we were buying groceries like fruit and veg, because that's actually, it's based on weight, not necessarily on the actual it's only based on weight, like it's not based on anything else. So that was really interesting for the kids to kind of understand, oh, well, okay, so one of these actually is not that price that's written there. And so those things, give kids a little bit of an understanding. And realistically, I always remember leaving home and not knowing that shampoo was so expensive. I don't know if you've ever really thought about it. It was the one thing in my life that I went, oh my goodness, this is so dear. I remember going, wow, like $14 for a thing of shampoo, and not understanding that. And nowadays, it's probably well more than that. I don't know. I always buy mine at the hairdresser these days, but it's that everyday need that you use, numerous times a week. It's one of those items that's kind of just a must that you have in your house so you have clean hair. And the fact that I had no idea at the cost of that was a really interesting concept. So I would encourage you to have those grocery items and get them to have a look at things. Why is this one costing $12? But this one's the same thing, the same size, but it's only costing 10. What's the difference and why? And it doesn't mean that you should buy the cheaper one. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's just so that they understand why you value one thing over another. That's just provides them with a little bit more understanding of how they can actually step out into the real world and work in a way that is really, really effective for them long term. So the other thing is, I don't know about you guys, but for me, I always remember being told, turn off the lights when you're not in the room. You're wasting electricity. It is, I had an interesting conversation with Regan the other day about this exact topic. And she said to me, she goes, I got cross at her because she'd gone to the gym and she'd left the aircon on in the house, and there was no one in the house. Well, the cats were in the house, and that was it. And I was like, what? And she said to me, she goes, "It's okay, Mum, we've got solar." And I went, "Oh, okay, right. Well, I've obviously missed a really quite important link there for her." And so out came our power bill. So I brought it up on my iPad and I said to her, "Actually, we still pay, even though we've got solar." And it was during the day. Her concept was, well, we don't pay for that while it's during the day and the solar is on. Which is interesting, and that just shows Regan living in Regan land. But I really loved how innocent that comment was. So then we started looking at, okay, well, this is the electricity bill. And she goes, "Oh, so you still have to pay?" I said, "Yes, absolutely. There is, sometimes in the year where I don't pay anything, and sometimes in the year where we use more electricity and it costs more, and that at that point we pay more." And so she had a look, and then we started talking about the patterns and the trends. In Queensland here, we tend to not put any, well, our house, we don't put the heater on ever, unless it's bitterly, bitterly cold, which I don't think I've ever put the heater on in this house. But, we were talking about, okay, well, it costs us more in summer. Why? Because your kids come home, you throw the aircon on straight away in every single room. And then you do things like go to the gym and leave it on. So, those types of conversations allowed her to understand that in a different way, and understand, I don't want them to go out in the real world and get this shock electric bill because they've not got good habits in that respect. So, all of those things add up. And as I said to her, I said, well, what we spend on electricity, on power, on Netflix, on whatever, is money that we don't spend on our holidays or don't spend on the things that we want to do, that we, can work towards. So it is interesting way for us to kind of look at those costs and about how, how you can successfully and cleanly explain them to your kids. So tax is an interesting one. Recently, my Luca has been working. Both my girls have jobs. They work coaching gymnastics and sport aerobics, and they love it. However, this holidays, well, it wasn't this holidays, in the Christmas holidays, they worked a lot. And so Luca earned money one particular week, and it was more than $500 that she earned in that week. And as soon as you get over $500 a week, all of a sudden tax starts being taken off the top. So for her, she could not understand why she'd earned $500, but yet only $478 went into her bank account. And this is something that is a really interesting understanding, that we as adults just know, death and taxes. It's one of those things. But for kids, it's a completely foreign concept for them. So then we began to talk about, well, what does income tax, like, why do we pay income tax? We pay it so that we've got schools, we've got hospitals, our roads and infrastructure, and all of those things which make up our society is part of why we pay tax. And everyone pays it according to the income that they've got coming into their world each week, fortnight, month, however they're paid. So I'm forever saying to my clients, it's actually not a bad thing. If you're paying a lot of tax, it means you're earning a lot of money, and this is not a bad thing. Everyone has to pay a certain amount of tax, and I actually think it's important to be thankful for that and be grateful. And I teach my kids, I showed them my tax return and I said, I've paid this much in tax. And Regan says, "Wow, that's a lot, Mum." And I said, "Yeah, but in actual fact, that means that we can have all the wonderful things that we do in this country. We can have free healthcare. Like, that is something that we take for granted here. If you go to the US, for example, all of a sudden you're in a world of problems. If you have to go to the hospital and you don't have health insurance, it can bankrupt people. So those types of things, this is why I really think it's important to have that discussion about tax and about what it actually gives them, so that they go in there having a good attitude towards it. You shouldn't begrudge paying tax. We all have our our grumbles about tax, but it is important to teach our kids why we pay it, and so that they understand the importance of that. So if everyone was to not pay tax, what would that look like? Okay, so Monopoly is a really interesting game, and I used games a lot as kids. I'm not sure if any of you have seen the new Monopoly with the credit
I was just
cards.
going to say, we've got a version of that. We've got both.
Yes.
And it's fun for a little while, but it's just not the same. It's not the same. They much prefer the money one.
And they do. Why? Because it's much easier to conceptualize holding a wad of banknotes as opposed to looking at a number on the screen. And I'm the same. I don't actually mind the credit card version. It's not too bad if they can conceptualize. When they're a bit younger, it's probably a little bit harder to grasp that concept, when they're looking at a wad of like $500 bills, and they go, oh yeah, I'm really rich, whereas you're looking only at a number. And it's also not the same concept as being able to look at, oh yeah, my friend next door to me who's next door, they've got lots of money and they've not got much because they've spent so much over here, but they've got lots of assets. Those types of things are really good conceptually for kids to understand. I know that it's not necessarily something that probably every parent loves to do, is play, Monopoly can be that never-ending story of a game where everything just feels like it, takes forever. But it is actually a really, really great game. Game of Life is the other one that, has some interesting discussions that can come from that. Things like, oh, you got caught speeding and you've got a fine. Things like that kids go, oh, really? Like, okay, so what does that look like, mum? And you can say, oh, things like, oh, you have to renew your driver's license. I had that conversation with Luca the other day. I said, well, it's going to cost you when you get your driver's license in September. It'll cost you money. You are going to have to pay for that driver's license. She was like really taken aback by that. And then we ended up having this conversation about insurance and about how we can make sure that we're not losing those big assets, those chunky assets that we have. And as adults, we know, right? You know that you insure your home. You know that you insure your car. Like that you don't even think about it really. And when you actually stop and think about it and explain it to a child, the importance of that is it's transferring that risk. In the event that you would be without that, what does that actually look like? It's the same in regards to life insurance. And I think this is a really important one to have that discussion with kids, I feel I'm very passionate about the fact that in today's society, we don't have enough emphasis on life insurance. It's in our superannuations, but people don't really understand that. And they don't really understand super either. So those are the types of also conversations that I always talk to my kids about. There's a fantastic book out there called The Richest Man in Babylon. You can read it. It is so easy to read. It is like it'll take you a night. It's a fable. It's about a man and about how he becomes the richest man in Babylon. So this man, he puts away a certain amount per week for his house, for his taxes, for his all of these things he puts away, and then he puts away 10% each week for his retirement, his later in life expenses. And to me, this effectively describes how superannuation works. So this is what I was having this discussion with the girls the other week, because I obviously deal with a lot of superannuation funds, and they are quite savvy in understanding how that works and why we have it. We had a little friend of Luca's over for dinner the other night, and I don't know why we were talking about all this, the market downturn that's happened in the last few days under these Trump tariffs. And Luca said, how does my superannuation look? she's only got a very small one, but she's got superannuation there. And she said, how does my superannuation look? And her friend, who also has a job and all of those things, said, what's superannuation? Well, it ended up being this really interesting conversation that she'd never had. And this girl she's turning 18. So she's in her final year of school. She is, and her parents are very intelligent people. It was just a really interesting thing that it had never come into a discussion. And I said, have you even heard the word before? And she said, oh yeah, those ads, where they talk about the this. I said, that's right. And we talked about what it's for and why and how you can't access it for a long time. However, the importance of it, because quite frankly, I don't think we're going to have the same social security system that we do have now. So, we got talking about those things, and it was just an off the cuff. Like, I don't plan the discussions that I have with my kids, and I would encourage you to just talk about things in bite-sized pieces with consideration to the ages of your kids. You don't obviously want to make it too much too young, but you do want to have lots of little conversations, like even getting your child to pay for something at the checkout, giving them the money. Okay, if you give over a $50 note and it costs $30, you're going to get $20 change, and watch that transaction happen. And that allows them to understand that flow and how that flow will move throughout their lives. And it's harder and harder. My parents all worked in cash. There was my mum never used a credit card, any of those things. It was always cash. So nowadays it's a bit different because we are tapping so much, but I would encourage, while kids are young, to take that money from the bank and be able to give them tangible life lessons with the physical process of actually handing that money over and receiving the goods.
Rachel, I was just thinking two things that you were just talking about then. One is the word teachable moment. So that's a teaching phrase that it's just like, if you see an opportunity, like you're having dinner at the dinner table and that conversation comes up, like swoop in and give that real life lesson in that moment, rather than like you're doing a like a presentation or like a seminar. Like when you see the moment, just like turn it into a lesson. And the other thing I wanted to ask about is, have you heard of Spriggy cards?
Yes. Okay, great. I really this is an interesting one. So how a Spriggy card works, for those of you who have never seen one of these before, it's like a card for kids, and basically you can wager
I've got one here somewhere.
Money to chores and things like that. So if they make their bed, you can tick it, and then that money moves across into that account. And it's they're a really, really interesting way for kids to be able to all of a sudden have their own money, but they earn it. And I really love this concept. It is not one that that wasn't around when my kids were little, and so now it's this interesting thought. It makes them understand the value of their trade-offs, right? So you might go downstairs and you might get them to empty the dishwasher. That might be something that they need to do for them to actually meet their pocket money requirements, right? You might have a list of things. It doesn't have to be super, super strict on anything. It's just starting to have those conversations and talk about things, making sure that kids can understand, okay, so I mowed the lawn. Mum put $10 on my Spriggy card. I don't know how much people pay to mow the lawn. I don't have a lawn here. But, Mum put that money on my Spriggy card because I did that chore. Those are the conceptual things that kids will understand, especially in lieu of starting to work. When they start to work, they do a job and they get paid for it. And kids seem to look these days that it's more along the lines of, the money's just there. Unfortunately, it's the age of, they pick up the phone and that phone then becomes their whatever it be, it becomes a little bit like the world doesn't exist in any true tangible form. So I do encourage those types of things, and they can see it in the Spriggy card. They can see when that money goes onto their account. You know, those are the things that are important. There's even some cool little apps that I will email out tomorrow that are really good ones for parents to use with kids to allow them to get the most out of some of those, you know, technology-based life lessons. But I think that those life lessons come with the point that you as the parent need to have those conversations with the kid at the same time. It's not about just getting your child to do those on their own. It's not going to be as effective.
Yeah, because that was just my question, because like in theory, this is like a modernized pocket money system.
Correct.
I guess. And they love it because they've got a special, like it's a proper credit card and they can buy things online. They can do anything with it. But I was just, when you were talking about having cash and how important it is, I was like, are we undoing all of that, you know, the learning by using the card, or is it the way that you explain it?
I think it's the way you explain it, Kirsty. And I think it's really interesting when you say that. I think at a younger age, cash is important because they understand the flow of how that works. As they're getting a little bit older, they will understand the concept of the card. And let's face it, that's probably all they're ever going to use in their real
Maybe
world,
it's a good
right?
transition. So start with the cash and the coins, and then
100%.
Go to the Spriggy card, and then onto a real debit card or whatever they have.
And so, I mean, look, interestingly as well, when your kids start to want, not need, want to buy certain things, that they will come up with ways that they may decide, okay, well, I want to be able to earn money. How can I earn money, or where can I earn money? And you'll see some interesting entrepreneurial things start coming up. You know, my Luca wanted to go on a trip to Europe with school. She's actually changed her mind now and decided she'll go after school. But what she did was we live in a complex, and she was collecting everyone's bottles. So she went round with her little wagon, putting her bottles in the little wagon, then bring them home, and then she boxed them all up. And then we go and go to the bottle recycler. And, you know, so it was really important for her. And the best part about the bottle recycler, they give them cash.
Yeah.
So she's holding it in her hot little hands going, okay, all of that work, and I got $80, or I got $50, or I got $100, whatever it be. But she could feel the connection of how much work it took to get that. And then they really appreciate things. That's not to say that you're not, you know, not getting them things and enjoying those questions and those times with them as they grow. But it is important to grasp that concept from quite a young age, that, you know, it doesn't grow on trees. And that's probably where I'm going with this, is that you really want to make sure that they have that, understand the value of what they've got. So begin with the end in mind. You know, I always am the first person to say, look, what do I want my child to become? Let's face it, as mums, it's our jobs, as dads as well, it's our jobs as parents to build our kids' resilience, to build their understanding of the world, to build them into responsible humans in society, right? And a big part of that comes down to money. So what kind of financial adult do I want my child to become? You know, if you want your child to be able to budget confidently in the world, then talk about the costs of things. If you're wanting your child to be able to become a really good saver, then talk about the joys of saving, about the benefits of savings. Find the habits that you want your child to develop and start your conversations there. That's the easiest point that I can actually start off with. And not being afraid to talk about money. It was such a taboo subject, in those that were born in sort of the 40s and 50s. It wasn't talked about. Whereas now there's a lot more financial discussions online, on TikTok, on Facebook, particularly this week, everyone's talking about these trade tariffs. And interestingly, my girl said to me, well, what's a tariff, Mum? I said, wow, great question. A tariff, it's a tax. Oh, so why don't they call it a tax? Well, and we went into this big discussion about the smoke and mirrors that's sort of happening there. But as they're little, think about what you want for them. And maybe it's something that you didn't have as kids. Maybe it's a bad habit that you've picked up along the way, and you think, okay, well, I don't want my kid to get a credit card. So don't talk about a credit card. Talk about a debit card, and make sure that they understand that. My big pet hate in the world at the moment is this afterpay. The only thing I think you should be afterpaying are big bulky items, a car, a house. They're the only big things where you should actually borrow money to purchase. Everything else, I believe, should be purchased with cash. If you don't have the money, lay by it. And those types of things, Luca put a lay-by on. She wants a new speaker. She put a lay-by on it the other day.
I didn't actually know you could still do that. Is it that they still exist?
Yeah, you can. Yeah. Only mainly bigger department stores. Kmart does it. Target, Myer, David Jones, even JB Hi-Fi do it. So, wow. I said to her, okay, cool. And she said, well, I want this. So I'm going to, but she said, I don't have the money now, but it was on sale. So she could lay by it. And she's just going to go in there every few weeks and put a little bit more money on that lay-by until she can take it home. But I wouldn't lend her the money. Even though she's got money in her bank account, I wouldn't let her take it out, because I said, well, what's the purpose of that money? And she said, well, that's my trip to Europe, Mum, after school. I said, so, okay, what are you going to do with the rest of, it's about give and take. And that is a really interesting sort of point to have that discussion with kids about that.
I'm afraid of maybe with my youngest, she's only 5, but, you know, with trying to explain that money's, I work hard for my money and everything like that, and we don't spend it in that. Maybe, I don't know, made her think that we can't afford things. Because, like, for instance, the other day when we drove past one of like those soup vans for the homeless, and I was like, oh, that's for people that, don't have a lot of money, so they go there for dinner. And she's like, oh, should we go there for dinner? And I'm like, oh, well, no, we're not in that. So I was like, oh, I'd gone too far with.
And Nikki, that's like a really, really good a good point. So maybe that discussion with your 5-year-old needs to be around, well, it's not that we can't afford it, it's that I choose to move my money here, or I'm choosing, I've made a proactive choice that for us, we need to put this money aside so that we've got a safety net, and talk about why you've actually made those decisions. These are the things that are going to shape her. She may go, okay, cool. Well, yeah, okay. So yeah, my mum's just decided no, that this is not for our family, and that's okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think I learned that the hard way. One of my boys, he's quite an anxious boy to begin with. And he said to me, his whole life he thought we were poor. And because every time he said something, I'd be like, no, we can't afford it. We can't afford it. And so he used to worry, apparently, that we were like worrying about money. And it wasn't, I was like, I should have said, I don't want to spend my money on that. Like, rather than we can't afford it. It's like, we could afford it. It's not what I choose to spend the money on.
Yeah, I think that's a good lesson, because I've done the same thing where I'm like, oh, we can't afford that, and so now she's like, oh, we should be eating at the soup van.
Yeah, because you mean you can't afford, you don't want to afford that, but they just here can't afford, and that
And look, it's really healthy that both of you have noticed those things. Do you know what I mean? Like, I commend you both for having realized that and being able to change your behavior to to meet that. I think that's really important, and that shows the flexibility of you guys, and it shows how perceptive you are as parents as well, which is something really important. And I'm not sure, Nikki, how you go, but I know for me, being split families, it's always a bit of a war on, well, it was in the early days, a war on who could do more for the kids, you know. And I stopped that very early on, and I said to my kids that I am going to be a good parent to them, and I'm not going to spoil them. That was what, to me, is being a good parent, is that I'm not going to give them what they want just because they want it. I will give them everything they need, but want is a negotiable thing, and that we will, on a situational basis, we'll assess each time that something like that happens.
Yeah.
Okay. Have you got any questions, guys? It's almost been the hour.
Oh, I feel like I've been asking my questions. I wonder, I'm sure there are lots of questions of people that didn't make it here tonight, but maybe they'll ask after the fact.
Yeah. Look, you know, I hope that this has been really helpful. It is really hard to step into this world, given that we are all a product of what's happened to us in the past, right? So we're all a product of our upbringing. So if you didn't talk about money in your family as kids, chances are it's not a comfortable thing for you. So I would, you know, the age old, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, but having those conversations, asking questions of your kids. What does it mean to you when I do this? What does it mean if something happens and you are unsure about it? What does it mean if you spend this money now and you don't get to do this later? Do something later. You know, what is the trade-off? Those types of things are really kind of important. But it's also asking kids what they value. And it's not necessarily things and, you know, like a milkshake with your kid can be something that, you know, that conversation that you can stem from spending that little bit extra time with them can give them the confidence to know of things, you know, letting them go in and actually physically try things. And I know how hard it is, especially, like, I know being on your own sometimes and you're trying to rush to get the groceries done and you've got 2 kids hanging off you and you just want to get home, make dinner and get into bed, right? And the kid says, why have you bought that, mum? Like, you know, and you know, and then you're in this big philosophical discussion about why you've paid some money or why you've decided that that was an important purchase for the day. But I think it's important that when those moments do arise, that we stop. And I know how busy life is, but we take the time to enjoy those moments with our kids and enjoy the fact that they've asked the question. You know, I just encourage, my kids ask questions all the time, and they used to be those annoying kids. I'm sure that people just thought I was crazy. I'd sit on the floor with them somewhere and explain something to them because, you know, a question had come up, and you know, that was just my style with them. And it doesn't mean that my style is going to work for everyone. I'm just sharing with you some tips and tricks about, from both a mum's side and a financial advisor's side, what actually works in my experience. You know, I think that it's really wonderful that you've taken the initiative to be here, and it means that this is something that's important to you, and that is definitely important across the board for everyone else. You know, to know, for your kids to know how much you care about them and you want them to go into the world and be financially responsible is a huge thing, right? You know, go and tell your kids, I sat through a seminar last night, a webinar about money and you guys. And it'll be interesting to hear the things that they ask around that.
Yeah. With regards to pocket money,
yeah.
So you've kind of spoken about it being linked to, like, them doing tasks to earn it. What do you do, say, when you're on holidays, so they're not doing that usual task to earn it? Would you not give it? Because obviously when I was a kid, we got the same amount of money every week, kind of regardless of what we were doing and what we did. So
Great question. I would think that when you're on holidays, if you're in a holiday house or something, that the kids should still be making their beds, putting their dishes in the sink or putting them in the dishwasher, those types of things. I would still be giving them that, but I would be letting them know this is conditional to, or you could just quite frankly say, you've earned this throughout the year. It's like when you work in a job, each year you get holiday pay for 4 weeks a year or whatever it be, that this is your holiday pay. Yeah, because you've worked so hard throughout the year. It's actually a really good lesson, that one, Nikki, because it actually will help them understand that, that there are entitlements and things that they are able to have later on in life.
Yeah, I like that. I was just thinking about cost per wear, like if it's all cost per use, because especially with, talking about Kmart, like the amount. Yeah. So every time I go in the Kmart, I always see some poor parent who's trying to get past the toy department and the children are crying because they want all the toys. And I remember those days. And I was thinking, like, my husband, who Rachel, he would much rather buy a very, very expensive pair of boots, but he'll literally wear them for years and he'll take care of them and he'll look after them. And whereas I'd probably buy about 20 pairs of shoes in that space of time because they change with fashion, they break, etc., etc. Yeah. But like for him, that's worth that spending the money. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are on cost per use or cost per wear.
Yeah, great question. Cost per use is actually really interesting, and this is something with kids that's super interesting. I often think that it is better if it's a staple, spend the money. I believe that if it's a staple, if it's something they're going to use every day. But you have to get them to understand why you don't spend that on every single item that you're using. So say, for example, you buy a really good pair of school shoes. They cost $150. I'm not sure, something along those lines. But they cost that much money for that entire time that they're, being used. Well, what does that look like? Why don't you spend $150 per pair of every other pair of shoes that you have? Well, because you don't wear them every day, because you don't, it's helping them understand the purpose behind everything and behind why you've actually done things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
And interestingly, I have a discussion with some friends of Luca's the other week, and they were talking about buying things on Afterpay. And I said, well, how many times are you going to wear that? Oh, probably just the once. And I'm like, and yet you're going to, for 4 weeks afterwards, need to pay that off. To me, I question, well, what benefit is that going to give you? And they kind of go, oh, yeah. So, there is those types of conversations that come from that as well. By the way, in case you missed it, I absolutely think Afterpay is a very scary place to be, and it needs to be discussed with kids. Now that we're finding there are people who have Afterpays that have been going on for very long periods of time, and then they get to buying a house and they can't borrow the amount that they really should be able to borrow, because on their statements it shows all these Afterpays which they count towards the serviceability of that loan. Right. So that is something that I am very, very clear with my kids about, is if you're using those things, use them responsibly. For one, consider what is the cost of this, because that immediate gratification versus the amount of money that you're pushing through, is it worth it? Potentially not. But they need to, in their own minds, decipher that. But also understanding the impact down the line, if they do need to borrow money for a house or for a car or for whatever it be, that those loans may very well impact what they're able to do. So that's a big one. And the other big one that, about Afterpay and things like that is they're not classed as a lending product per se, and therefore they are under a different set of rules to what a credit card, for example, would be. And those discussions need to be had as well, so that kids who are getting to that older age group understand that, okay, I have my own consumer awareness hat on. When I'm doing these things, I need to be aware of, well, what is it actually costing me? Is there a cost behind it? You know, and questioning those things. Those things are really important to question over, you know, the long term, so that you know whether you've got the money to be able to do that or not. And my lucky last point, which I do a financial literacy program at a local school once a year. And one thing that comes up every year in the last 3 years is online gambling, believe it or not. Boys largely, once they're getting into grade 12, they tend to be 18, right? And they can get these apps, and these apps look like the games they play, you know, on a regular basis. And so the discussion needs to be had about, you know, and they hear the ads on TV, bet with your friends, bet with your mates, whatever it be. It needs to be had a very clear discussion about the impact of that, because there's a lot of kids out there who are, you know, working really hard and then losing this money. They might have had one big win and then losing the money afterwards. You know, it is important to just keep those conversations going for the long term, because I think that is really important to make sure that, you know, that respect for money is there. It's, you know, I always joke with the girls, you know, well, what are you doing with that? It's because you might as well just go and stick it on red at the casino, you know, like make educated decisions about how you're disposing your money. We work too hard. Your kids will work too hard in their times to be able to, you know, just let this money disappear. And let's face it, it's not getting any easier for our kids to get into the market, you know, to buy houses and things like that. I fear for what it's going to be. It's going to be a very, you know, the cost of houses has gone up so much, but comparative to the amount that you're earning, it's astronomical. So it's becoming harder for people to get into this world. And therefore, I feel that, you know, having those conversations and getting those good money habits going early on means that they will have more of a shot to getting into that world. And it may be that mum and dad help out or whatever it is. You know, the bank of mum and dad is going to become a very important bank in time. But, you know, those types of good money habits at an early age will help them get to those points later on in life.
Thank you, Rachel. So, and thank you, Nikki, for being here as well. It's been awesome.
Thank you.
Rachel, if people love you, which I'm sure they will and do, how can they work with you? So obviously, you're not, you know, you're very passionate about financial literacy for children, but you can work with adults too.
Absolutely, absolutely. So generally speaking, I work with small to medium-sized business owners, families, young families. That is my passion point. I feel like I can help the most in that area. So you can find me on either social media or on at our website, which is listed on here. We offer a complimentary first meeting for anyone who wants to come and have a bit of a chat and just understand if financial planning is for you. I would suggest that for most people, making a choice to invest in themselves is something that pays off over the long term. And yeah, would welcome you in to come in and have a chat with us, because we would love to help you where we can.
And they're really handy just in Wynnum, just up top of Chestnut Street. And so really easy to get to. It's beautiful, beautiful office. So yeah,
Thanks.
pay them a visit. All
Thanks,
right.
guys.
Thank you so
I
much.
really appreciate your time, Nikki. Thank you, and everyone who's watching from home. And yeah, we will please send through any questions if you have any as well. I'll send through an email tomorrow with some links and some resources for you.